Art, Fire, Walk With Me. This program takes a look at our collection through a pop culture lens and aims to connect our community to art through a relevant and relatable avenue. Tonight, we're excited to have you here to celebrate the 90s pop culture phenomenon, Twin Peaks, and to hear from John Thorne about his extensive knowledge and experience studying the show that came to greatly influence and define television for the following 2 decades. For 13 years, John was co-editor and co-producer of Wrapped in Plastic, a magazine where he wrote extensively about Twin Peaks and the work of David Lynch and Mark Frost. In 2017, he joined the editorial staff at The Blue Rose, where he wrote about Twin Peaks: The Return. John is the author of the book, The Essential Wrapped in Plastic: Pathways to Twin Peaks, and is co-editor and contributor to the Kindle book, Twin Peaks in the Rearview Mirror: Appraisals and Reappraisals of the Show That Was Supposed to Change TV. John is co-host of the podcast In Our House Now, and just this year, he released Ominous Whoosh, A Wandering Mind Returns to Twin Peaks, which closely examines each episode of the 3rd season and offers in-depth theories about the show's most perplexing riddles. You can follow John on Twitter at ThorneWIP. Before I turn it over to John, I want to remind you that Pop of Art will occur monthly from now until June, exploring a new theme each month with new activities and performances that will bring your favorite pop culture moments to life and ignite your imagination. Next month, on February 10th, we will be celebrating Black Panther in partnership with the Pan-African Connection. So be sure to visit our website, dma.org, starting next week to learn more and purchase tickets. With that, please join me in giving a warm welcome to John as he takes the stage.
Well, welcome to Twin Peaks Night at the Dallas Museum of Art. I assume many of you know at least a little bit about our topic tonight. But rest assured, if you're not familiar with Twin Peaks, I'm not going to delve into the minutia of plot or behind-the-scenes detail. Tonight, I'm going to talk about why Twin Peaks is still relevant and why I have such a keen interest in it. I'm also going to examine Twin Peaks as an example of great art and why such art connects with audiences. I once asked David Lynch why he thought Twin Peaks endured so many years after the show had been canceled. And he said, there are plenty of mysteries, but they don't travel like Twin Peaks travels, to different cultures and different countries. It's something you just can't figure. Everything's relative. There are some people who love it, and there are some who don't know the first thing about Twin Peaks. Now, you can't argue with that. For many, if they know anything about it at all, Twin Peaks is just a television show, and a failed one at that. But for others, Twin Peaks is a powerful, resonant piece of art. After all, here we are, 30 years after it first aired on television at the Dallas Museum of Art, celebrating the pop cultural phenomenon that is Twin Peaks. So we have a couple of questions to ask. First, why does this show still live in the popular consciousness? And another, why have I spent the better part of my life studying and writing about it? Twin Peaks was a primetime television drama created by filmmaker David Lynch and screenwriter Mark Frost. It premiered on ABC television on April 8, 1990. And during its short first season of 8 episodes, it became something of a sensation. The series was pitched to audiences as a quirky, surreal, murder mystery soap opera. And the story, powered by the question, who killed Laura Palmer, captivated audiences. In those early days, the show was a hit. Part of the reason it was a hit was because the show exemplified the power of television. Producers Frost and Lynch knew they had an opportunity to tell a complex, ongoing story with a large cast of characters. TV was a medium that allowed for this. But, with few exceptions, television had never really attempted it Up until Twin Peaks, most television shows told simplistic, easy stories, nothing that truly challenged viewers. As author David Foster Wallace explained, commercial entertainment proceeds more or less chronologically. It eases you from scene to scene in a way that drops you into certain kinds of easy cerebral rhythms. It admits of passive spectation, encourages it. TV-type art's biggest hook is that it's figured out a way to reward passive spectation. Twin Peaks defied these conventions. Frost deliberately and Lynch intuitively resisted this kind of storytelling. They ignored or simply rejected the tired practices of network TV storytelling and forged something new and potent. How did they do this? How did Twin Peaks break the mold of traditional commercial television? On the surface, there was a large cast, a complex mystery, and a mix of subplots. This is, believe it or not, a simplified view of the complex interconnectivity of the characters in just the first 8 episodes. But the show went much further than this. Twin Peaks dared to present extensive dream imagery in a way that connected the viewer with the unique individual consciousness of its main character, Dale Cooper. Twin Peaks then veered out of the forensic, earthbound plot of its murder mystery and dared to evoke the supernatural, the surreal, the otherworldly. Twin Peaks posed that there were other realms besides the everyday world we inhabit, realms that channeled the subconsciousness, that reflected the balance between good and evil. Finally, Twin Peaks dared to broaden its scope and address the very nature of the universe and our roles in it. How do each of us fit into a vast, unfathomable reality? What part can each of us play in the endless cycle of the universe? These are dense and difficult concepts, but Twin Peaks dared to incorporate them into its text. So yes, Twin Peaks was a hit for all these reasons. But the magic didn't last. This was 1990, and the TV landscape just wasn't ready for something as challenging and original as Twin Peaks. This was years before what we now think of as the new golden age of television, where streaming services and subscription networks allow for more adult, nuanced programming. Programs such as The Sopranos, The Wire, Breaking Bad, Mad Men, and Deadwood, just to name a few. Back then, networks needed to please their advertisers, and the best way, ultimately, to do that was to deliver shows that were far less demanding than Twin Peaks. Shows that, as Wallace explained, rewarded passive spectation. So it wasn't surprising that second season of Twin Peaks saw audiences fall away. The network refused to support the show. The ratings fell, and Twin Peaks limped through its second season until it was ultimately canceled. Despite its short life, Twin Peaks garnered an ardent fan base. People who were captivated, devoted, and profoundly impacted by the show. I was one of those fans. I was one of those fans who reveled in the show's contradictions, in its raw, imaginative power, in its everlasting openness to interpretation, its enduring ability to stimulate. I couldn't contain myself. Right from the start, I was compelled to engage with the show. I started making complex but crude character relationship charts, kind of like the one I showed you earlier. And I started making lists of trivia questions. But I was seeking another kind of engagement as well. I wanted to know more about the medium of television and I wanted to know more about filmmaking. And so I went back to school, to the graduate program in TV, radio, and film at Southern Methodist University. I earned my master's degree at SMU, and my thesis focused on narrative theory and television. And still, I wanted to do more. I had met another Twin Peaks fan, Craig Miller, who shared my passion for Twin Peaks. Like me, Craig wanted to engage more thoroughly with the show. Together, Craig and I created a magazine devoted to Twin Peaks and to the works of David Lynch and Mark Frost. Yes, it was a good old-fashioned paper magazine. Don't forget, this was the early 90s. There was no internet and no podcasts in which to engage with other fans. Our magazine was called Wrapped in Plastic, a title that originated from one of the show's iconic lines. In the pilot, character Pete Martell uttered the famous words, "She's dead, wrapped in plastic." We knew Twin Peaks fans would recognize it, and using it allowed us to avoid paying licensing fees for using the words Twin Peaks in our title. The first issue of Wrapped in Plastic, crude as it was published in October 1992, 2 months after David Lynch had released the follow-up feature film to Twin Peaks, Fire Walk with Me, which at the time was a box office bomb and a critical disaster. Still, we loved that film, and in our very first issue, we sang its praises. We recognized the film's power from the start, and in the 30 years since its release, the critical community has come to reappraise it. Fire Walk with Me is now considered one of David Lynch's stronger films. But back to Wrapped in Plastic. Honestly, we didn't know if we'd ever make another issue after the first. But that first issue sold pretty well, and so we produced a second, and then a third, and then we just kept going. Before long, we were interviewing many of the show's actors, and then Twin Peaks co-creator Mark Frost himself. We started to dig into the behind-the-scenes information about the show, how it was made, what happened on the set, where the writers had hoped to take it if it hadn't been canceled, and why they thought it ultimately was canceled. We went further than that, though. We also started publishing in-depth essays analyzing many different aspects of the show. These included topics such as Arthurian legend in Twin Peaks in American mythology, Twin Peaks in Buddhist theology, Twin Peaks in Gothic symbolism, Twin Peaks in the fairy tale, just to name a very few. We also looked at the parallel between Twin Peaks and other great works of art, like 2001: A Space Odyssey, Moby Dick, Dracula, the film Picnic at Hanging Rock. We were also interested in the international response from all over the world to Twin Peaks. We had reports from Japan, Germany, Russia, Spain, France, the UK, and many more. To our surprise, Wrapped in Plastic was a minor success. For 13 years, we published an issue every 2 months, ultimately producing 75 issues of the title. Along the way, we managed to interview literally dozens of the actors, musicians, and other creative talent who were part of the show. And we interviewed David Lynch twice. Wrapped in Plastic proved that there was a devoted fan base for Twin Peaks even years after the show had ended. But still, there's the fundamental question. What, if any, significance did Twin Peaks have? Did it change television? Did it impact the way television shows were made? Did it affect the kind of stories that were being told on TV? Certainly in that first decade, the entirety of the 1990s, the answer was no. Mark Frost was emphatic about the failure of Twin Peaks to significantly change television. When we interviewed him in 1993, he echoed David Foster Wallace. Television, works as a sort of hypnotic tool for advertisers. It creates passivity in its viewers. Networks don't care what the contents of their shows are. They just want to deliver viewers to their advertisers. David Lynch was equally blunt. 5 years after Twin Peaks had aired, Lynch told an interviewer, all these rip-off things that came after didn't catch one little whiff of what Twin Peaks was. Lynch and Frost were right. Twin Peaks did not change network television in the years following its cancellation. Not at first, because some things take time. The ardent fan base that loved Twin Peaks from the start was still out there. And some of those fans became part of the next generation of television writers and producers. Put simply, nobody had forgotten Twin Peaks. It legitimized television. It proved that the medium could be as challenging as any other art form. That complex, rich, meaningful art could find a home in the culture's most pervasive mass medium. Indeed, many of this era's greatest television writers and producers were inspired by the original Twin Peaks. Creators such as David Chase, who created The Sopranos. Chase says, as a friend of mine said the other day, anybody making a 1-hour drama today who says he wasn't influenced by David Lynch is lying. If you look at TV drama since its inception, shows would tell the audience what they were going to see, show it to them, and tell them what they'd seen. Nobody was ever puzzled by what was going on. With Twin Peaks, Lynch and Frost show it to you and leave you thinking, what did I just see? That was revolutionary, and it still is. Noah Hawley, the creator and producer of the TV series Fargo, says, love it or hate it, you can't deny that Twin Peaks is one of the most influential TV series in history. I looked a lot at David Lynch's work and this idea of the uncanny. In Twin Peaks, not every image has to be tied to information. Rather, it creates an experience. So much of storytelling is information delivery. But Twin Peaks created a mood with imagery that didn't always have to make sense. Jane Campion, the creator and director of the miniseries Top of the Lake, says, David Lynch is without parallel in our generation, unique, disturbing, brilliant, homey, and very often darkly funny, even hilarious. He is also the single most liberating inspiration of my creative life, a genius apostle of the subconscious. Donald Glover, the creator of the television series Atlanta. Twin Peaks was this show I really liked. A lot of questions came up with no real answers, and there was a mystery. And I kind of wanted to do a show that had those elements, but for people who were rappers. And then there's Damon Lindelof, writer and co-creator of the TV series Lost. Lindelof says, a seminal moment in my storytelling was Twin Peaks. When the show got into a more supernatural space, it engaged us on an entirely different level. But Lindelof has another anecdote to share as well. He relates this story, quote, after J.J. Abrams and I wrote our Lost outline, we had a meeting with ABC head of programming, Lloyd Braun. ABC, don't forget, was the television network that aired Twin Peaks originally. Lloyd Braun was like, I love this outline, but just promise me this show isn't going to be Twin Peaks. This was my first meeting with the network president, and I took real issue with what he said, and I didn't know if I should put my foot down. But JJ said something to the effect of, hey, look, you're using Twin Peaks as a cautionary tale. We aspire to be as impactful as Twin Peaks. Better for our show to be a disaster that crashes and burns, but one that people will remember. versus something that's not really special or aspiring to be anything, end quote. Twin Peaks did change television. It pushed boundaries and paved the way for many new creators to make a lasting, indelible art in the medium. That was before Twin Peaks came back to television again. Recognizing there was an environment more conducive to challenging, unorthodox storytelling, Mark Frost and David Lynch brought Twin Peaks back to TV in 2017 for an 18-part third season. They knew Twin Peaks still had the power to captivate, that it still resonated. And the fact that it was returning to television 25 years later caused a bit of a sensation. You can imagine how I felt when I heard that news. But the TV landscape had changed dramatically in the decades since the original Twin Peaks aired. Could David Lynch and Mark Frost manage to bring something new to the medium again? I asked Mark Frost this very question just a few months before the new Twin Peaks premiered. It's a different landscape, I said. The bar is much higher now. And Frost replied, "We are very aware of that. I think you'll be surprised at what we deliver." And yes, they did it again. As TV producer Sam Esmail, creator of the series Mr. Robot, said of the new Twin Peaks, "It was groundbreaking, one of the best television shows ever. It changed the game for all of us all over again." In Twin Peaks: The Return, Lynch and Frost delivered a story that evolved beyond its earlier form into something new, astonishing, and potent. How did they accomplish this? Once again, they implicitly invited us, the viewer, to participate in the art. Let me take a moment to talk about David Lynch's unique way of making art. Lynch is notorious for being vague when he's being interviewed. It's not just because he wants to maintain the mystery behind his creative process. Certainly, he prefers to let his works speak for themselves. But also because he knows words are not enough to encapsulate his artistic sensibility. In interview after interview after interview, Lynch invariably resorts to the word idea to describe specific themes and topics in his films and his way of making them. On writing scripts, he says, "The script-making process involves getting ideas, writing them out, and moving things about. On scenes and characters, the ideas present the kind of flow of how it's going to unfold, and the ideas tell you each scene and each character, and you just follow the ideas. On Twin Peaks, ideas came, and this is what the ideas presented. Just focusing on Twin Peaks, these things came out for us, and there they were." Idea is an imperfect word. Lynch probably knows this, but no other term works for him. That his films come from ideas makes perfect sense. Lynch uses the term because it's the closest he can come to expressing the inexpressible. When Lynch describes ideas, it's up to us, his audience, to figure out what he is saying. Personally, when I hear Lynch use the word idea, I think he's trying to convey abstract, philosophical thoughts, things that are fluid and dynamic, notions akin to visions. There's almost a quantum physics component to how Lynch approaches ideas. If you define an idea too exactly, that is, put it into too precise words, the idea reduces to a single explanation and thereby loses its potential to be more than one thing. In quantum terms, it's like a probability wave that collapses into a single state upon being observed. For Lynch, an idea confined to a strict definition loses its mystery. As he explains, a man tells a very abstract, very original story to a group of people. He finds himself compelled to explain what he wants to say in words more and more precise because they, the people, don't understand. By the time he's finished, the story has been reduced to one thing. There are no more harmonics. David Lynch also knows that even if he could perfect his message, crystallize a thought into flawless, absolute prose, this message would still encounter the perceptual barriers and biases of his audience. He understands that everyone is going to see and hear things in their own way. As Lynch says, every viewer, no matter what film they're looking at, has a different reaction than another viewer. It's just the way it is. Everybody is at a certain place, and they have so many internal things going on. The frames of the film are exactly the same, but every individual reaction is different. How do you overcome these barriers to understanding? How do you overcome this frustrating, imperfect mode of communication? If you're David Lynch, the answer is you don't. You don't overcome imperfect communication. You use it to your artistic advantage. David Lynch embraces the idea of imperfect communication and incorporates it into the very essence of his stories, into the very way he makes films. For Lynch, the viewer is not a passive recipient for sound and imagery. The viewer is a collaborator in the art David Lynch is putting forth. He wants his audiences to be their own creative force. This attitude about the audience frees Lynch to open his texts, to embrace ambiguity, to invite viewers, each according to their own predilections, to fill in the blanks. The viewer becomes an active participant in Lynch's art. It's an opportunity for the viewers to use their imagination. As David Lynch explains, quote, "The more abstract the film, the more audiences give. They fill in spaces, add their own feelings," end quote. For those viewers who can embrace a participatory narrative, one that offers multiple readings, one that hums with infinite possibility, then Twin Peaks: The Return was a rare gift, a piece of art that asks for engagement rather than muted acquiescence. David Lynch and Mark Frost, too, understood that Twin Peaks, since its inception, encouraged viewers to engage with the show. If viewers saw in Twin Peaks ideas that neither creator intended, then those ideas were valid. As Mark Frost noted early on, how do you know when something's in your work and when it isn't? If someone sees it there, if they see it there, it must be there. Because for them, it is there. It gets into a strange kind of gray area where creativity is something that is shared, that the audience is using its own creativity in interpreting the material. Put simply, what Frost is telling us is, whatever you or I or anyone sees in Twin Peaks is a legitimate interpretation of the work. When Lynch set out to make The Return, he and Frost certainly constructed the work to be open, to deliberately resist closure. In this way, watching The Return became a process of communication, one in which audiences can converse with the work and become, in effect, co-creators. In The Return, Lynch is less concerned about where the story is going than he is in how the viewer makes sense of the story as it unfolds. This is what Lynch refers to time and again as room to dream. Lynch's ideal is to create a work where there's, quote, dialogue between a picture and its audience. Watching a movie, we're like detectives. We only need a little bit of something, and then we'll add in the rest, no problem, end quote. David Lynch's art is most alive when it occupies that space between creator and audience, when the art itself becomes an amorphous entity available for the audience to shape. It's the journey, not the goal, that interests Lynch. It's what David Foster Wallace sees as, quote, the story sharing its valence with the reader, where the reader's own life outside the story changes the story. This is not some great revelation. This is true of all great art. Look around the exhibits at the Dallas Museum of Art, and you'll see. Great art moves us in unexpected ways. We find ourselves interpreting and reinterpreting what we see. And as we do, we gain valuable insight into our own identities. Twin Peaks is just one example of great art. No matter how confounding Twin Peaks is, there is something immensely satisfying about it, something transformative. We will never completely understand the whole of Twin Peaks. Pieces of it will endlessly elude us. But struggling with the mystery of the work is a worthy endeavor in itself. Engaging with Twin Peaks can be revelatory, not only about what we see in it, but also about what we ultimately see in ourselves. So I leave you with this simple thought. When someone asks me why I've spent so much time and so many words on Twin Peaks, my answer is, why do you sing along with your favorite song? I believe each of us wants to participate in the art we love. If the art is special, if it touches us like nothing else, we can't merely sit still. We must express ourselves. We sing and we dance. Twin Peaks is my favorite song, and I am compelled to sing along with it. And with that, I'd be happy to continue to participate in Twin Peaks with you if you have any questions or comments. Questions or comments? Sorry about that. This gentleman right here.
When the return came out a few years ago, did you get advanced peeks at that, or did you have to wait to see it all on Showtime?
The question is, did I get an advanced look at Twin Peaks: The Return? And the answer is mostly no. Both David Lynch and Mark Frost were extremely tight-lipped and kept everything under wraps. I was very fortunate to be invited to the Hollywood premiere of Twin Peaks: The Return 2 days before it premiered on Showtime. So I got to go see it with the cast and the crew. Mark Frost was generous enough to invite me out, and it was unforgettable. It was just amazing. But that's as close as I got to an early screening. Yes?
Is there anywhere we can read your master's thesis?
Wow. My master's thesis was actually not on Twin Peaks. It was on the television series Homicide, Life on the Street. I don't know if anyone's ever familiar with that. I did that on purpose because I was just bothering everyone in my class about Twin Peaks, so I picked another show. But I assume it might be available. Maybe there's a website that allows you to find those things. I really don't know the answer to that. But yes?
What do you think about the idea of Twin Peaks as like a commentary on television itself and a reaction to that?
Well, I mean, that's a great theory. I've heard that many times, the idea that the Twin Peaks is essentially commenting on how television works and our relationship with television. It's sort of similar to some of the things I was saying. Fire Walk with Me has a great opening scene, which you're probably familiar with this lead pipe smashing a television. And the idea there is that we're moving out of television into film, but I think Lynch understood later the television was, well, he knew this before The Return as well, as he was going to make another television series called Mulholland Drive, and that didn't happen. But I think he understood later that television was the right medium for this. But I have read a number of theories where they're sort of teasing us with how we relate to an ongoing story, and maybe they're teasing us too much. Yes?
Do you think that Lynch and Frost will ever return back to the world of Twin Peaks? Because I know that Lynch was working, allegedly, something with Netflix called Wisteria or Wisteria Lane, and everybody's kind of buzzing if there was something there, but he's been pretty silent about all of that now, too.
I have learned to never say never because I never thought Twin Peaks would come back. In fact, David Lynch said twice, Twin Peaks is dead as a doornail. It's never coming back. Mark Frost convinced him to bring it back. That's what happened. I think it's very, very unlikely that we'll see Twin Peaks again. I think they finished it the way they wanted to finish it. I wouldn't say it's impossible that Wisteria, if it ever, or Unrecorded Night was another name of the potential show, could overlap in some ways. With Lynch, you never can tell. But I have to be careful of some of the things I say. I know that both creators are kind of done with it. So, but again, never say never. Anybody else? All right. Oh. But that gentleman right down there in the audience happens to be my son.
What's your favorite episode?
My favorite episode of which series? My favorite episode of the original series, well, is the pilot. The pilot's perfect. There's nothing. There's not a mistake in the pilot. It's a perfect piece of film. I could watch it over and over and over again. My favorite moment in the original series is, well, it happens in a very violent sequence where Bob's killing Madeline Ferguson, but there's a sequence interposed with that where Dale Cooper is at the Roadhouse, and he and a number of other characters there, and they sort of sense something in the air. They know something is happening, and Donna Hayward breaks down and cries, and Bobby Briggs just sort of looks off into the universe, and it's one of those scenes that some of the other writers comment on, where it's information it's being delivered. You kind of have to reach out yourself and figure out what's happening. It's an incredible sequence from the original series. And then in the new series, Twin Peaks: The Return, I think I could watch Part 8 over and over again, which is, I showed a brief shot of the atomic explosion, and that was all in black and white. That's an amazing hour of television. So there's your answer. Yeah.
Do you have a least favorite character?
Some of the later second season is pretty weak. So I would probably say Little Nicky, if you remember that character, which was, I'm very forgiving of Twin Peaks because the people who were making the show, they had a really tough, project in front of them. They had to sustain a show week to week on network television with a cast of about 30 different people and keep them all involved. And so they were under a lot of pressure. And so it kind of veered away from what it was before in the earlier parts of the season. And it got into a little, David Lynch himself says parts of season 2 got a little, too weird for him. And so anyway, that's my answer.
Why do you think?
Oh.
Why do you think that? I guess my feeling is that in The Return, the Audrey story is so separate. It's like she is not
Yes, so if you've seen Twin Peaks: The Return, Audrey Horne, of course, is an extremely popular character from the original series, and her storyline in Twin Peaks: The Return is very much insulated and separate from the rest of what's going on. The behind-the-scenes reasons for that is that Sherilyn Fenn, who plays Audrey Horne, did not want to do what was originally scripted, and David Lynch created a new story for her. And in effect, he kind of created a short little film that's inserted inside Twin Peaks: The Return, and it's the story of Audrey Horne, which is by itself, if you just watched the 4 scenes that she's in, it's a 4-act structure. It's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and then the denouement. It is really a remarkable little story. So, well, it was premium television now, and we're not on networks anymore. Yeah. Okay, well, I look forward to chatting with you after this. Thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it.